Welcome back. Today, we're decoding the hidden history of a truly fascinating city, Munich. And look, we're going to go way, way beyond the modern stereotypes. You know, the Oktoberfest beer, the Lederhosen, the world-class football. We're skipping all of that today to uncover the true gritty roots and the hidden geological secrets of the Bavarian capital. Okay, let's dive into this. What truly makes Munich so unique? I mean, apart from the highly surprising fact that this city is actually older than Berlin. Why do so many people consider this specific spot their home? Well, today we're going on an epic journey through time. We're talking all the way from the icy, desolate prehistoric era right up to the bustling modern day, just to figure out exactly what built this iconic city from the ground up. But hey, before we fire up the time machine, I want to quickly mention that this explainer is brought to you by Deutsch Lingo. As the content creator, they offer absolutely fantastic online lessons for all levels for a really reasonable fee. Whether you want to master German to explore Munich yourself or just pick up some basics, you should definitely book your free trial lesson now using the link provided. All right, so to uncover Munich's foundation, we're going to look at three historical pillars today: the white gold, a rapid waterway, and an icy natural event. Let's just jump right in.
Starting us off is Pillar 1, the white gold and the bridge heist.
To truly understand the birth of Munich, we have to travel all the way back to the 12th century. I want you to picture the modern-day city center, the Marienplatz. Back then, this specific location was an absolutely crucial crossroads. It was where the famous salt route, which stretched all the way from Salzburg to Augsburg, intersected with other local paths. And why did this matter so much? Because back then, salt was literally known as white gold. It was incredibly difficult to extract, super hard to transport, and utterly essential for preserving food. Basically, it maintained life. And naturally, you know how human history works, where there is vast wealth, there is intense, fierce rivalry. Initially, you had Bishop Otto von Freising. He controlled the only bridge over the nearby Isar River at a place called Föhring, which allowed him to collect these hefty, incredibly lucrative tolls from every single passing salt merchant. But the Duke of Bavaria and Saxony, Heinrich der Lohe, or Henry the Lion, well, he wanted those massive profits for himself. So what did he do? It's basically a medieval heist. He essentially bypassed the bishop entirely by just building his own rival bridge downstream. On June 14, 1158, he officially founded a new market by the monks, or Munichen. And the craziest part? He actually got this total power move blessed by his cousin, Emperor Friedrich I, Barbarossa, who happened to be the most powerful man in Europe at the time. That ultimately secured Heinrich his own minting rights to print his very own currency. Let's move to and see how this builds, because Heinrich founded his market literally by the monks. And that imagery just completely stuck to the city's identity over the centuries. In fact, if we trace the city's seal through time, it's really fascinating. We start with a simple, solemn, hooded monk's head right there on a 12th century coin minted by Heinrich himself. Then, by the 16th century, this depiction had evolved. It turned into a monk holding a Bible, offering a gesture of blessing. But as the centuries rolled on, the figure became increasingly childlike, almost playful, until the 1920s, when it had completely transformed into the iconic, joyful young girl we know today as the Münchner Kindl, the Munich child. Now, the immense wealth generated from this white gold also created some incredible, long-lasting local traditions. Let's look at the year 1318. There was this merchant named Burkhard Wadler and his wife Heilwig. They had made an absolute fortune in the salt trade, and they decided they wanted to give back to their community in a truly massive way. So they made this monumental charitable donation to the local hospital, the Heilig Geistspital. To understand the sheer jaw-dropping size of this gift in medieval terms, it was valued at the equivalent of 60 pigs, or roughly 15,000 loaves of bread. That was enough to feed the poor and sick at the hospital a generous extra meal once a week for an entire year. But the Wadlers didn't stop there. Actually, their philanthropy was just staggering in its scale and logistics. Once a year, they funded a rider, the famous pretzel rider, who would travel on horseback through the city's streets distributing free pretzels to the people. They handed out exactly 3,000 of them annually.
To put that massive undertaking into perspective, Munich only had a total population of about 8,000 people back then. Think about that. Almost half the entire town received a free pretzel from this single family. It completely cemented this wonderful baked good as an enduring symbol of Munich. And this regional prosperity just continued to explode when, in 1332, Munich secured a complete monopoly on the salt trade. This effectively forced all merchants to stop, rest, and trade right within the city limits.
And all that trade brings us right to Pillar 2, the Isar River as a high-speed waterway. With so much vital trade happening all the time, the Isar River became this incredibly busy transit route, giving rise to a booming, highly skilled timber rafting industry that was already flourishing by the year 1300. And guys, we are not talking about a couple of people floating downriver in a small wooden dinghy here. No way. These traditional rafts were massive, floating wooden islands weighing a staggering 20 tons. They were 18 meters long, 7 meters wide, and constructed out of 17 massive tree trunks. But honestly, the wildest part of the entire job, the raftsmen had to build them from scratch, right at the riverbank, in just about an hour and a half before setting off. It was a frantic, literal race against time, because if they took too long and the heavy wood sat stationary in the water, it would just become completely waterlogged and sink straight to the bottom. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the sheer thrill of the journey. This wasn't some relaxing, lazy river ride. It was a perilous, adrenaline-fueled undertaking. There were dangerous, incredibly steep drops to navigate along the river. The absolute highlight, and definitely the most terrifying part of the route, was Europe's longest raft slide. It measured 345 meters long with a staggering 17-meter sheer drop in elevation. Hurtling down this wet wooden slide, these 20-ton rafts would accelerate up to 45 kilometers per hour. It was essentially a medieval roller coaster used for heavy industrial shipping. It required incredible, top-tier skill and bravery from the raftsmen just to survive the trip. And this extreme, high-speed delivery system literally built Munich's stunning, world-renowned architecture. By the end of the 15th century, an absolute armada of 147 of these heavy rafts arrived in the city. They transported 630 cubic meters of solid, round timber. This was the exact, highly specific wood required by the master architect Heinrich von Straubing to build the colossal roof truss of Munich's iconic Frauen chair. So, the next time you look up at that massive church today, remember that it simply wouldn't exist without those daredevil raftsmen risking their lives on the rapids. Oh, and as a quick architectural side note, those famous onion domes sitting majestically on top of the church towers today, those were actually added a bit later, in 1525, and they became the definitive blueprint for typical Bavarian architecture ever since. Which finally brings us to our third and final foundation, Pillar 3, the legacy of the Ice Age. To truly understand why Munich is situated exactly where it is, nestles so perfectly between those beautiful snow-capped mountains and pristine lakes, we have to zoom way, way back in time, 20,000 years ago, to the end of the last ice age. During the peak of this glacial period, the landscape here was completely buried under a frozen ocean of ice, literally. Only the very highest mountain peaks, like the Jochberg, actually managed to poke out above the desolate surface. It's a fascinating geological phenomenon known as a nunatak. Between these towering mountains, the incredibly massive 20,000-year-old glaciers were forced to squeeze through narrow gaps, acting essentially like a giant icy slide, pushing with absolute crushing force out towards the valley below. As the planet finally began to warm up, this melting ice triggered a crucial natural event. The intense, violent flow of glacial meltwater aggressively dragged unbelievable amounts of heavy stones and rubble down into the valley. This cataclysmic action created the Munich Schotterebene, or the Munich gravel plain. We're talking about a massive 1,500 square kilometer expanse of deeply compacted rock. Thanks to a subsequent ancient drought period, the thick, unmanageable forest eventually cleared out, leaving behind a highly habitable heathland perfectly situated right between the Alps and the lakes.
Without this exact sequence of violent glacial events, Munich simply would not have the solid, flat ground to exist where it does today. It's literally the foundation of the city.
So you might be wondering, who actually moved on to this prime glacier-carved real estate? Well, long after the ice retreated, the Celts were the very first to establish long-term settlements on the gravel plain around the 3rd century BC. Following them, the highly organized Romans marched in as rulers around 15 BC, bringing all their infrastructure and culture with them. But as Roman power eventually began to fracture and collapse, Germanic tribes increasingly infiltrated and settled the area by the 2nd century AD, establishing small, resilient agricultural communities led by their fierce clan chief. And this brilliantly illustrates how this ancient convergence wasn't just some simple political change in management. It was a profound generational blending of distinct populations. The mingling of the newly arrived Germanic settlers with the already Romanized Celts actually gave birth to an entirely new tribe, the Bajuwaren, or Bavarians. What's absolutely incredible about this is that this ancient mixing left a highly visible genetic legacy that persists to this very minute. Those original Celtic genes are actually the historical reason why there is such a high concentration of red-haired people living in Bavaria today. It is quite literally living history, written right there in the DNA of the population. Bringing our narrative back to the modern day, those deep, glacier-carved roots and centuries of dynamic, turbulent history have supported a truly thriving metropolis. And it is far from a stagnant museum piece, let me tell you. Munich is constantly growing, buzzing with innovation and life. Projections indicate that by the year 2040, the city's population is going to experience a massive 14% increase. It's going to swell to over 1.8 million people who will proudly call this rich, historical place home. So the absolutely crucial point to take away from all of this is that Munich is infinitely more than just lederhosen and a good pint of beer. From the crushing weight of Ice Age glaciers to rival medieval bridge builders, and from 45-kilometer-per-hour river lumberjacks to philanthropic pretzel riders, it's these deep, layered stories that breathe incredible life into Germany's southernmost metropolis. We really hope you enjoyed this explainer. To leave you with one final thought today, if the very ground beneath Munich was shaped by violent glaciers, and its skyline was built by daredevils riding 20-ton wooden roller coasters, what dramatic forces will shape this resilient city in its next 1,000 years? Keep exploring, keep learning, and we'll catch you on the next one.